Troopers had been stationed at the roadside checkpoint for hours. It started to feel like they were wasting time until they made a critical decision. Instead of stopping every vehicle, they would focus only on cars carrying 3 or more South American men. That's when they spotted a vehicle matching the description. It seemed like a long shot, but something about it raised suspicions. As the vehicle slowed down, the driver stepped out and approached the officers calmly. One of the troopers, Corell, explained the situation, that 4 South American individuals were suspected in a recent abduction. The driver showed his identification and claimed to be a taxi driver. He explained that he was transporting his passengers to Presidio, Texas, and even confessed he felt uneasy. His passengers were acting strangely, he said, and he was relieved they had been pulled over. The officer then asked for identification from the passengers. They handed over their green cards. 2 men named Rafael Calderon and Russ Ramirez. Neither of them resembled the suspect from the earlier vehicle description. There was also a third man they had to consider. Corell and his partner wanted to dig deeper, so they decided to run the names through their database. Unfortunately, the area had terrible radio reception. Surrounded by mountains and valleys, the radio signal kept cutting out. Corell's partner tried several times to call dispatch, but it was no use. With no immediate way to confirm their identities, the officers took down the men's information manually. They decided to let the car continue for now. There was only one road through that part of Texas, stretching on for over 150 kilometers. Letting the car go to mean they couldn't find it again. Meanwhile, around 2:15 p.m., FBI agents arrived in Eagle Pass to investigate a disturbing discovery. A body had been found. Hopes of finding their colleague alive were quickly dashed. The deceased was identified as Richard Latham, a U.S. Customs inspector. He had been restrained with his own handcuffs and shot twice in the back. The tragedy now escalated to a murder investigation involving a federal officer. Special Agent Dennis Harlan, visibly shaken, struggled with the loss. "He was one of us," he said. "We take it personally when someone in our law enforcement family is killed." While devastated, Harlan understood the importance of finding the body. It was critical evidence. Latham had been killed with a .38 caliber weapon, the same type as the missing service revolver. Detective John Martin from Del Rio reflected on the cruelty of the act. This was more than a killing. It was an execution, he said. The suspects weren't just violent criminals. They had knowingly targeted and murdered an officer of the law. These were individuals who clearly had no regard for human life. Out on the highway, Corell and his partner finally managed to get through to Central Dispatch. They submitted the names they had collected earlier. Moments later, they got a hit. One of the passengers, Jesus Ramirez, had an outstanding warrant for a DUI. It wasn't enough to arrest him immediately, but it was enough to act. The troopers made a move to locate and stop the car again. Fortunately, the vehicle was still on the highway. The driver pulled over once more. Corell approached the rear seat where Ramirez was sitting. "Show me your hands," he called out. As he moved closer, he noticed a man shifting around nervously. Then, without warning, gunfire. Chaos erupted. With no time to wait for backup, Corell's partner grabbed a shotgun and prepared to return fire. "It was just the 2 of us," Corell recalled. And in moments like that, you act fast or someone dies. Covering each other, the troopers managed to pull Calderon out of the car and secure him behind a patrol vehicle. Meanwhile, Ramirez had turned a .357 revolver on himself and pulled the trigger. Officers found another gun, a .38 caliber revolver, on the floor. It was confirmed to be Latham's missing service weapon. They also recovered Ramirez's ID and a folded piece of paper from his jacket. Calderon, on the other hand, was carrying a large knife and a cloth bag. Inside, jewelry worth thousands of dollars. As they pieced together the evidence, it became clear this traffic stop wasn't random. It was a breakthrough in the case. On their way back to Del Rio, Special Agent Moses Allen questioned Calderon, who sat in the back of the patrol car. Calderon began recounting everything that had happened over the last 48 hours. Special Agent Dennis Harlan from Customs was now leading a critical mission, finding Richard Latham before time ran out. Everyone involved knew the brutal truth. In many cases like this, kidnapped officers don't survive. The clock was ticking, and the team had only a small window of opportunity to rescue him alive. The first task was to comb through vehicle records. An agent began reviewing every car that passed through the checkpoint between 4:15 and 5 p.m., the time Latham was last seen. Under 100 vehicles were recorded, but the data didn't include names or addresses of the owners. In the early 1980s, databases weren't as fast or complete as they are today, so pulling those details would take hours. Meanwhile, the Del Rio police worked on creating a composite sketch of the suspect. Using eyewitness reports from Inspector Torres and others, they carefully built a facial image piece by piece. Once it was finished, the sketch was sent to every law enforcement agency in the area. Officers and agents hit the streets, scanning for a gray Pontiac Grand Prix. They had a general idea what the driver looked like, but not the passengers. Customs helicopters joined the search from above, but the leads were few and far between. In the vast openness of Texas, tracking one vehicle felt nearly impossible. By now, about 90 minutes had passed. A car moving at around 55 miles per hour could be far beyond their reach. With each passing minute, the search zone widened. Still, they pressed on. Soon, the DMV responded with the names and addresses linked to the license plates. 6 of the cars were registered in Del Rio, but 2 were traced to El Paso, nearly 700 kilometers away. That raised eyebrows because the suspect had previously mentioned he lived there. One customs agent contacted the nearest FBI field office. Special Agent Don Weatherman received the alert. When I heard a customs officer was missing and no one had seen him since his shift, it was a bad sign, he recalled. We didn't know much, only that something serious had happened. He quickly assigned Agent Charles Riley to track down the vehicle owners in El Paso. But when Riley visited the 2 listed addresses, neither vehicle was there and no one answered the doors. It looked like the registration data might be outdated. Undeterred, Riley returned to the office and instructed his team to dig deeper into the current ownership of both cars. The investigation dragged into the evening as records were checked manually. Meanwhile, local and state police set up roadblocks on all highways near the border. Every car was stopped, every ID checked. By the time FBI agents from San Antonio arrived in Del Rio, it had already been almost 7 hours since Richard Latham vanished. Despite the efforts of dozens of officers, they were no closer to finding him. As night fell, hope began to fade. Many silently accepted what none wanted to say out loud. They might now be searching for a body. At sunrise, the hunt picked up again. Planes joined the search, covering more ground than helicopters could. State troopers kept roadblocks active around Del Rio. They were still hoping the suspects hadn't gotten too far. Back in El Paso, Agent Riley made progress. One of the gray Pontiac's registered owners was an elderly couple. They were ruled out. The second vehicle, however, had been sold to a man named Ricardo Cortez. He never updated the registration. A background check revealed something troubling. Cortez had a prior drug conviction. Riley decided to track down his current location. He visited Cortez's mother, who said she hadn't seen her son in several days and wasn't sure when he'd return. However, she confirmed he still had the vehicle. Riley headed to the El Paso Police Department and requested a photo of Cortez. Once he had it, he faxed it to agents in Del Rio. When they compared it to the composite sketch, there was a clear resemblance. Finally, investigators had a name and a face. They weren't just chasing shadows anymore. They had a real lead. And maybe, just maybe, they were getting closer to finding out what happened to Richard Latham. Roughly 80 kilometers away from Del Rio, in a rural area near Eagle Pass, Texas, a man was out collecting firewood when he stumbled upon something horrifying. A body lying in a ditch along Highway 277. The man was still wearing the official uniform of a U.S. Customs officer. Back in Del Rio, authorities had already suspected that the individuals responsible for a recent jewelry heist in Mexico, who had crossed into the U.S. in a gray Pontiac Grand Prix, were also behind the abduction of Inspector Richard Latham. Now, they feared the worst had happened. The body was quickly identified as Latham. Law enforcement officers from the local department secured the area and awaited the arrival of FBI agents. A chopper was dispatched immediately to fly agents from the border to the discovery site. Meanwhile, roadblocks remained in place just in case the suspects were still somewhere nearby. Though the likelihood was slim, State Trooper Art Correll wasn't ready to give up on the possibility that the criminals might still be within reach. He and his partner had been manning a checkpoint for hours with little to show for it. Just as they were about to scale back the operation, they spotted something, an unassuming car with 3 men inside. It was a long shot, but it matched their profile. They decided to pull the car over. The driver got out and approached the officers. Correll calmly explained the situation, that they were looking for a group of South American men linked to a kidnapping. The driver immediately produced identification. He claimed to be a taxi driver, hired to take his passengers from Ensenada to Presidio, Texas. He admitted he was nervous about the behavior of the passengers. They seemed jittery, and he was relieved to have been stopped. Correll then asked the passengers for ID. They handed over green cards, one for Rafael Calderon and another for Russ Ramirez. Neither matched the earlier description of the suspect, and there were only 2 passengers. Still, Correll and his partner wanted to be thorough. They tried to radio dispatch to run the names, but the terrain was working against them. The mountainous, remote region made communication nearly impossible. After several failed attempts, they decided to note down the identification details manually. With no confirmed charges and only one narrow road in that part of Texas, they let the vehicle go, planning to follow up once they had a signal again. Later, at around 2:15 p.m., the FBI team reached the site near Eagle Pass. The reality hit hard. It was indeed Richard Latham. His hands had been bound using his own handcuffs, and he had been shot twice in the back. This was no escape attempt gone wrong. It was murder. For Special Agent Dennis Harlan, the loss was personal. When one of our own is killed in the line of duty, it hits all of us, he said. As much as it hurt to know Richard was gone, having his body gave us a piece of the puzzle we needed. It was solid evidence. The weapon used was a .38 caliber revolver, the same as Latham's service weapon, which had been missing since his disappearance. Detective John Martin was particularly disturbed by the execution-style killing. These guys knew exactly what they were doing, he said. To kidnap and then murder a federal officer shows just how dangerous they really are. Meanwhile, Correll and his partner finally reestablished radio contact and sent the passenger info back to headquarters. Within minutes, they got a hit. Ramirez had a warrant out for a previous DUI charge. It wasn't enough to detain him outright, but it gave them the leverage they needed. The troopers quickly moved to intercept the car again, which was luckily still on the highway. They pulled it over a second time. Correll approached the back seat and asked Ramirez to show his hands. As he drew near, he saw Ramirez squirming and ducking down. Before Correll could react, gunshots rang out. As Trooper Correll cautiously approached the back of the vehicle, he called out to Ramirez, asking him to show his hands. But instead of responding, Ramirez hunched forward in his seat, visibly agitated. Correll noticed his shoulders shifting and repeated his command. Then shots rang out. The sound shattered the quiet, and the situation turned deadly in an instant. Without hesitation, Correll's partner reached for the shotgun. There was no time to call for backup. It was just the 2 of them, and their lives were on the line. They reacted swiftly, doing exactly what they'd trained for in situations where every second could mean the difference between life and death. Correll moved quickly, pulling Rafael Calderon from the car and pushing behind the patrol unit to ensure he couldn't grab a weapon. With his partner providing cover, they checked on Ramirez. The man had used a .357 revolver to take his own life. Another weapon was also found inside the car, a .38 caliber revolver. This was no ordinary gun. Later testing would confirm it was the service weapon belonging to the murdered inspector, Richard Latham. The officers also found Ramirez's identification and a piece of paper tucked in his jacket. Meanwhile, Calderon's belongings were searched. He didn't have a firearm, but he did carry a large knife and a cloth bag. Inside the bag, jewelry, lots of it. Items worth thousands of dollars, later confirmed to be part of the loot from the heist in Mexico. There was also something else, a handwritten bill of sale for a gray 1975 Pontiac Grand Prix, linking him directly to the earlier investigation. Now in custody, Rafael Calderon was on his way back to Del Rio. On the ride, Special Agent Moses Allen sat beside him, asking questions. Calderon, calm but weary, began to talk. He explained that it all started in El Paso. He, Ramirez, and another man known only as Carlos had traveled into Mexico with a plan. Ramirez was the mastermind. He had scouted the jewelry store and believed it would be easier to pull off a robbery south of the border than in the United States. During the heist, Calderon and Ramirez entered the store, while Ricardo Cortez waited outside as a getaway driver. They grabbed everything they could in minutes. "Move it! Grab it all!" Ramirez had yelled. Then they sped off, vanishing into traffic. Their next stop was the U.S. border at Del Rio. Everything was going smoothly at first. Cortez had cleared an interview with the immigration officers, but their luck ran out when Customs Inspector Latham began searching the car. Latham popped the trunk, then moved to inspect the back seat. That's where he found the bag full of stolen jewelry. Ramirez panicked and drew his weapon. As the car pulled away from the checkpoint, Cortez and Carlos took Latham's gun, handcuffed with his own cuffs, and restrained him in the vehicle. Calderon said Ramirez remained in control throughout and eventually made the grim decision. Latham knew too much. He had to be eliminated. According to Calderon, they dragged the inspector into a ditch. It was Ramirez, he claimed, who fired the 2 fatal shots into Latham's back using the stolen service revolver. After leaving Latham for dead, the group drove back to El Paso and crossed the border into Mexico. In a hotel room, they divided the stolen items, placing the most valuable pieces into pillowcases. The plan was to split up. Ramirez and Calderon would smuggle the jewelry back into the U.S., while Cortez and Carlos remained behind in Mexico. Later, they'd all regroup in El Paso. As Calderon kept telling his version of events, Agent Allen noticed something strange. He was consistently painting Ramirez, now dead, as the mastermind and the killer. Still, Calderon's statements matched many known facts. Investigators reviewed the evidence carefully. Calderon's story placed him at the scene, and his bag held direct proof. The deceased man, Ramirez, couldn't confirm or deny anything, but his fingerprints, the weapons, and the jewelry all told part of the story. As investigators pieced together the puzzle, another suspect began to take shape. Ricardo Cortez, identified as the driver of the gray Pontiac Grand Prix, was still missing. And Calderon had mentioned a 4th man, someone he only knew as Carlos. That meant 2 suspects were still on the run. Within 6 hours of discovering Richard Latham's body, a new development surfaced. Mexican authorities in Piedras Negras contacted the FBI to report that several personal items belonging to the inspector had been found in a parking lot on the Mexican side of the Eagle Pass border. Among the items were Latham's wallet, a canister of police-issued pepper spray, and some paperwork that caught the attention of Special Agent Don Weatherman. There were also 2 traffic tickets issued by the California Highway Patrol, one in the name of Rafael Calderon, who was already in custody, and another issued to Carlos Pena. Now, the 4th suspect had a full name and a paper trail. Carlos Pena turned out to be a Mexican national who was legally residing in the United States. The Fed secured his immigration records and obtained a photo of him. Now, they had images of both Pena and Cortez, 2 fugitives still out there somewhere. The very next day, El Paso police received a tip. Cortez and Pena were believed to be hiding out in an apartment complex on the city's south side. Authorities acted immediately. FBI Special Agent Charles Riley coordinated the operation. Police locked down a 2-block radius around the building, with ground units surrounding the area and helicopters scanning from above. The mission was high stakes. SWAT teams prepared to clear the apartment unit by unit. The hallways were narrow and dangerous, and they had no idea if the suspects would try to shoot their way out. The entire building was thoroughly searched, but in the end, it turned up empty. Despite the setback, Customs Officer Dennis Harlan was determined. You can throw all the resources you want at a case like this, but sometimes it comes down to solid, persistent police work and a little bit of luck. Soon, luck came knocking. Law enforcement in Piedras Negras spotted a gray 1975 Pontiac Grand Prix sitting in a parking lot. FBI agents rushed across the border to inspect it. Unfortunately, Mexican law didn't allow them to seize the vehicle or remove any items from it. They had to work with what they had: photographs and fingerprint samples. The tools were low-tech: strips of tape, some cardboard, and a lot of patience. But the effort paid off. When the prints were processed at FBI labs in Washington, they confirmed the presence of all 4 suspects inside the car. Back in El Paso, the investigation continued. Agents learned that Pena and the now-deceased Ramirez had once lived in the same apartment complex. When they interviewed the property manager, she recognized Pena's photo immediately. "Yeah, I've seen him," she said. "He and another guy. They brought a bunch of boxes out of a gray Grand Prix the night before the murder." She also remembered a third man arriving in a blue car. When shown more pictures, she identified him as Ricardo Cortez. The 3 men had unloaded the Pontiac, left the blue car behind, and taken off together. The next day, Cortez even called the manager, asking her not to have the blue car towed. He claimed the mechanic would be by soon to pick it up. That car became the FBI's best chance to catch Cortez. Agents staked it out through the night and into the next morning. Around midday, a man approached the vehicle and drove off. It wasn't Cortez or Pena, but the agents decided to follow him. He drove to a quiet neighborhood, parked, and entered a bar. Moments later, he came out alone. Agents stopped him and asked a few questions. He cooperated, admitting the car belonged to Cortez. He said Cortez had asked him to deliver the car to the bar, but never showed up. Unsure what else to do, he left the keys with the bartender. The bartender confirmed the story. He hadn't seen Cortez either. As agents expanded their search, they turned their focus to Cortez's girlfriend. When questioned, she claimed she hadn't heard from him in over a week. But agents weren't buying it. Neither was her mother, who urged her to come clean. The agents asked for permission to install a phone tap on the home line. Reluctantly, she agreed. Now, all they could do was wait, hoping Cortez would reach out. The agents kept their hopes steady and their eyes on the phone. Ricardo Cortez's girlfriend hadn't spoken to him in over a week. At least, that's what she claimed. But her nervousness and her mother's suspicions told a different story. Eventually, she gave in to the pressure. Investigators asked for permission to install a wiretap on their home phone line. Though hesitant, she agreed. The goal was clear: catch Cortez in communication and use that to track him down. 2 long days passed. Then finally, a call came through. "Be careful," the voice said. It was Cortez. That single phone call gave agents exactly what they needed. They traced it to a motel in El Paso. Without wasting time, the FBI, El Paso police, and federal customs units surrounded the location. SWAT teams moved in, securing every exit and clearing the area. The operation was flawless. And just like that, Ricardo Cortez was in custody, captured just days after Inspector Richard Latham's murder. However, Carlos Pena, the final suspect, was in the room. He was still out there. But new leads started pouring in. Ricardo Cortez admitted that Pena and Ramirez had pulled Latham's body into a ditch. He also dropped a bombshell. He said it wasn't Ramirez who fired the fatal shots. It was Calderon. This revelation changed everything. Until now, Calderon had tried to blame the shooting on Ramirez, who was dead and couldn't defend himself. Cortez's testimony suggested otherwise. He also revealed that Pena had stayed behind in Mexico, in the border town of Juarez. Cortez and Pena had left the car behind and traveled separately by bus. That made Pena harder to find, especially because the FBI couldn't legally arrest him on Mexican soil. So, U.S. agents passed their intel to the Mexican authorities, who launched their own search effort. The U.S. Customs Service even offered a reward for Pena's arrest. And soon, word spread to his family and friends. Authorities wouldn't rest until he was in handcuffs. 2 days later, Pena made his move. He called the FBI office in El Paso and agreed to surrender. A meeting point was arranged on the Santa Fe Bridge, the midpoint between Mexico and the United States. Because the U.S. agents couldn't legally step foot into Mexico for the arrest, they waited for Pena to cross the borderline himself. When he did, they took him into custody immediately. With Pena now in hand, investigators had every piece of the puzzle. During questioning, Pena gave a statement that matched Cortez's version of events exactly. That consistency helped confirm the truth. Rafael Calderon had pulled the trigger. He was the one who had executed Richard Latham. The justice system moved swiftly. In the San Antonio federal court, Calderon, Cortez, and Pena were all indicted on 6 felony counts, including kidnapping and the murder of a federal officer. Ricardo Cortez, who had cooperated with investigators, struck a plea deal. He admitted guilt for conspiracy and assault on a federal agent. Carlos Pena also pled guilty to the same charges. Both men were sentenced to 25 years in prison on state kidnapping charges. As for Rafael Calderon, the man who fired the deadly shots, he faced the full weight of the law. He pled guilty to the murder of Inspector Latham and was sentenced to life in prison. The loss of Richard Latham couldn't be undone, but his colleagues made sure justice was served. Special Agent Dennis Harlan reflected on the case with sorrow and pride. A murder is always a tragedy, he said, but when someone who served their country is killed, it hits us harder. We owe it to them to hold their killers accountable. On January 31st, 1984, a memorial was held for Inspector Latham at the Del Rio border crossing. At 2:30 p.m. that day, customs officers across every U.S. border post paused for a moment of silence, united in honoring their fallen brother.